And so how it has been in Accra for the time that he was writing this book, and how we can still see some of those things today, in the present day today. That is what fascinates me, and that's what I want to talk about tonight.
So, Seto is reading from Aikwe Ama's The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. And this story is set immediately or just before the coup that topples Kwame Nkrumah. And so this is just a few years into Ghana's independence. And even though it is fiction, we know that fiction never happens in a vacuum.
Yeah.
So please, let's...
Okay, so I'll read the first part, and then we continue it, and I'll come back. So I want to talk about the first part where he describes shops. And I want to say that as he was talking, when they had their discussion, they were talking about sites as sources of history, sites representing history. And that's exactly what he does in his work. He takes us back to history and talks about what we have seen and what is there in the present times. So he has this, the main character, the protagonist is called the man. So he says the man moved a little less slowly now, keeping to the dark earth beside the gutter that ran the length of the road. He passed by the gloomy building of the post office, and that's the post office that is close to the Malcolm shop that he's going to talk about. And his pace quickened involuntarily as he began descending the steep little hill beyond that. Across the road at the bottom, the street lamps perfunctorily gave a certain illumination to the shapes of the row of old commercial buildings. So he mentions his old commercial buildings, and their light bounced duly off the corrugated iron shelters of front of the shop gates beneath which the watchmen slept. So how many watchmen do not sleep today at their workplace? He passed by the UTC, the GNTC, the UAC, and the French CFAO. The shops had been there all the time, as far back as he could remember. The GNTC, of course, was regarded as a new building, but only the name had really changed with independence. The shop had always been there, and in the old days, he had belonged to a rich Greek and was known by his name, A.G. Leventis. So, in a way, the thing was new, yet the stories that were sometimes told of it, the story that was sometimes told about it were not stories of something young and vigorous, but the same old stories of money changing hands and throats getting moistened and palms getting greased. Only this time, if the old stories aroused anger, they were nowhere near the present stories. The sons of the nation were now in charge, after all. How completely the new thing took after the old. And let me read the next paragraph, and then we'll move on to the next person. Behind the firms, the dim mast of Yensua Hill rose from the ground, where its forms ended. It was now possible to see the sky, still dark, but not so dark as the earth beneath. On top of the hill, commanding it just as it commanded the scene below, its sheer, flat, multi-storied side, an insulting white in concentrated gleam of the hotel spotlights towards the useless structure of the Atlantic Caprice. So he's talking about Caprice. Sometimes it seemed as if the Hill building had been there for a purpose, like that of the attraction, to eat off all the massive anger of a people in pain. But then, if there were any angry ones at all these days, they were most certainly feeling the loneliness of mourners at a festival of crazy joy. Perhaps then the purpose of this white thing was to draw unto itself the love of a people hungry for just something such as this, the gleam, in moments of honesty, had the power to produce a disturbing ambiguity within. It would be good to say that the gleam never did attract. It would be good, but it would be far from the truth. And something terrible was happening as time went on. It was getting harder to tell whether the gleam repelled more than it attracted, or attracted more than it repelled, or just did both at once, in one disgustingly confused feeling all the time these heavy days. And so, down from the CFAO roads, the food stands opposite the block were all deserted. And then he says, like some kind of fat worms lying around on the lip of the gutter from the road, and the less discernible corn husks that had held together now long swallow balls of kenkey. The man stopped uncertainly as he came to the strange building opposite the stands, the block. This was the block. So before, I don't know whether he wants me to comment a bit on this or we'll come back to it.
I think you can comment generally, and also the audience, please make down your notes so that when we call for questions, then we generally deal with all the panelists. But you can comment. I hope also that people, those who know Accra quite well, the High Street, will know that this is the place that is being described from the, let's say, Usher Fort, walking down towards Cathedral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
All right. I think he's given a big explanation, quite a big explanation to what I was going to say. So you see that he talks about it as if he's talking about the present buildings over there, but he's referring to history. And he says that the thing has changed hands, but it's only that what has happened is that the sons of a nation have taken over. So those buildings were put up by, I don't know which people, it could be the Greek, and he gave the original settlers. So he's telling the history, but he tells us that what has happened, we have moved from UTC to UAC to GNTC, but those same buildings are there, and now we have another generation of people who have taken over the commerce. So he's talking about the commerce, sales, trading in Ghana. People have taken over, but what is the benefit of this change of hands? We'll talk about it later. What does it benefit the present generation whilst the buildings are still being maintained? What does it yield?
And maybe to just add a level of doom, this is crying Liz Johnson's tears. Even those buildings are in danger of being torn down for a marine drive to be built there. So that's just a word for the future.
Okay.
Teresa, over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm looking at Ama Taidu and representations of Accra in her works. And I think I should begin by saying that Ama Taidu uses certain in her works for specific purposes, mostly to help beef up her themes. And so you'd notice that in her earlier works, I'm looking at The Dilemma of a Ghost. I'm looking at No Sweetness Here. There's a juxtaposition of the city and the village. And in the village is presented as the cradle of traditional values and all that is morally right in the village. Then you go to the city, and the city is presented as a place of crime, a place where traditional values no longer work. And it will go back to what Ayukwama is talking about here, where because of the corruption in the city, because of things not working well, people are trying to find ways and means to survive. And so traditional values are actually eroded in the city. So when you read the play about
is it the Anoa?
The Dilemma of a Ghost.
The Dilemma of a
You
Ghost.
notice that when Ato Yorson comes back from the US, he goes to the village to visit the family members, but then he stays in the town. He stays in Accra, where he works. And there, he and the wife stay, and instead of sending money home to help the mother pay off his bills, all the bills she's accrued, taking care of him, he keeps saying, oh, my wife needs this. My wife needs a machine to wash. She needs a machine. And so they see Accra as a place that is taking their son away from them. So they are not really favorable towards Accra. And when they come to the village to visit, and she's complaining about the treatment she received when she goes to Accra, then Accra is not presented in a positive light in there. Then you look at No Sweetness here, in the short story, in The Cutting of a Drink, when the young man is sent to go and look for his sister in the city, Master, and then he goes to the city. In the first place, he's overwhelmed by everything he sees in Accra. He sees so many people, so many cars. And he gets down, he's so overwhelmed that he forgets his bag. And he meets his friend who lives there. And the friend is doing well, so he says. But then he lives in this small room. In the evening, the friend takes him out. They go to this restaurant, and they are drinking. And he's amazed to see women who are drinking beer, and smoking. It's like, what is this place? So this whole idea of, the degradation of morals is still introduced. And then he meets the sister, who is a prostitute. And the sister tells him, every work is work, any work is work, any work is work. So he comes back and reports that to them. Now we look at her later work, and we notice that Accra undergoes a slight change. Now, what is she talking about now? Now, in her later works, she's talking about development, change, freedom, some form of opportunities, especially for the female character. And Accra suddenly becomes a place that is able to give the female character that opportunity to be something new. Mm-hmm. And so most of the readings I'll do would come from changes. Okay, so let's see if I can find one. Let's talk about the 20th Century Hotel, where AC goes. Driving towards the 20th Century Hotel, and note the name of the hotel, 20th Century, so lots of changes. AC was completely overwhelmed by the vision of so much gold, golden red and red filtering through the branches of the coconut palms. Although she herself had been born not that far from the sea, even she wondered, as she later looked for parking outside the hotel, how people who had such scenes at their backyards felt on a daily basis. Then, ashamed of herself for automatically applying a research approach, she told the sociologist in her to shut up. The beach was only a couple of kilometers to the right of the hotel, and the fishermen who were busy packing up their boats down there might have been amused if they had heard her thoughts. For at that time, what they were wondering was whether the government would fulfill its promise to help them get motorized boats and better nets, and when the Minister of Power would stop increasing the price of kerosene. And that night out at sea, would it be warm? For definitely, a chillier wind than they were used to, was blowing through their lives. Having located a good place, AC packed expertly, jumped out of the car, locked it, and strolled towards the reception desk of the hotel, her shoes beating out the determination in her mind.
Okay. Thank you for that reading. And who can figure out which hotel this is? The reference that Amatedu is fictionalizing here. It's a hotel on the coast. Even though it's called the 20th Century Hotel, I think it's the only hotel that is truly 5-star in Accra. Truly. Labadi Beach Hotel, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Would you read another one, or Mr. Ameka?
Okay, let me read another one. This is about the life and the zest of Accra also. The fact that Accra never sleeps. And it's in relation to Ali Konde's house in Nima. So he says, Ali's house was a big structure at the entrance to Nima from Newtown. It had been built in the middle of the 1940s by a local man who had made a lot of money in the Second World War. None of the children this man had sent to England to be properly educated had bothered to come back. So out of sheer frustration, he had driven their different mothers out, and for several years had lived alone. Then once he knew he was about to die, he had put the house up for sale to spite his family. He knew they were waiting for him to die to begin harassing one another over the property. The only condition to go with the sale was that whoever bought the house should wait for him to be laid in his grave before taking possession, which is exactly what happened. Ali had then thoroughly renovated it and built a proper wall around it. Early in his sojourn in the south, Ali had decided that he would always live in the zongo of the cities in which he found himself. He had not tried to analyze that decision into its parts, except to say that, for one, zongo is the only area in these places where one can be sure of always getting some decent tuwe. If the house he had bought was not exactly in Nima, he could at least console himself with the thought that it was near enough. From his favorite corner on the balcony upstairs, he could hear and see that city within city, buzzing with maximum activity during the day and winking all over at night, also with maximum activity. Nima never slept.
That's it.
Right.
We need not say anything. Now, Mr. Megacha will read from. Thank you.
That's right. Let's appreciate.
Yeah, Mr. Megacha will read from a contribution he made in an art project, an art exhibition called Landing in Accra. Not London, but landing, arriving in Accra. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Landing in Accra consisted of, paintings, pictures upon pictures by different sign writers and painters in different parts of the city. And the project arose out of the curiosity of Virginia, the artist Virginia Ryan, when she and her husband arrived in this country. Her husband was the Italian ambassador, but Virginia herself originally came from Australia, and then she trained in Edinburgh, Scotland, before they came here. And she said one thing that caught her attention were the signs and what stories they were telling about the city. Now, I was drawn in or attracted by the theme she chose for the project, which was landing in Accra. It took my mind to a place that is current or has been, in existence at the Accra airport. Perhaps you all know the Landing restaurant, the Landing. Then also my attention was drawn to a picture that someone else saw, John Nash saw in Accra in the 19th century. And he did a lithograph, or drawing and printing of it, called it Landing in a Surfboat at Accra in 1891. And it refers to the way people landed at the area behind the James Fort and the lighthouse. In those days, when people came, and usually by boat, 1891, the aeroplanes, hadn't been functioning yet. People came by boat, and then as they drew closer to Accra, they had to anchor for, canoe men to go, and then they put ropes there, then they would come out and land in the canoe and be rowed, over to the coast. And so, for Accra in 1891, people were attracted by, the special sense of being in a special place, which was Accra in 1891. Then, here we are close to 2002, Virginia Ryan comes by air, and she found no other team to choose for her project than landing in Accra. And meanwhile, the restaurant is there. So you will see these images in there. It is these that attracted me. But I was not the only contributor. There were other contributors, including Professor George Payne Hagen, one time commissioner for culture and director of the Institute of African Affairs. Then there was Madame Abna Buzia, a professor, daughter of Professor Buzia, but she's a professor in her own right. Now, her theme was the artist as a witness. George Hagen talked about the cultural images, and then I talked about landing in Accra as a guided tour of artistic Accra. So these were the things that attracted me to do the writings. But before I pause, there was one image by Professor Hagen, which he drew from the signage. And it is an image of a man who was being chased. And when he tried to get into the river, there he was met by a crocodile. When he raced away from the crocodile and tried to get into the bush, the lion was waiting for him. His next option was to climb a tree. Then as he climbed the tree, there was a snake dangling over there. Depicting sometimes the human situation in which we find ourselves. So, I'll come to a stop for the time being.
Okay. Thank you very much for these inputs. First and foremost, do we have questions from the audience or any interactions with the artists? We've heard one deal with Accra from the 18th centuries, or in the 1891s actually, so 19th century. Accra, there's actually the same place, because not so far from where Ayikwe described, and then
Nima.
Quite along the road all the way to Nima and then to Labadi. So any things that have come up in anybody's mind, if not, then the readers could, the panelists could continue. Anybody so far? Oh, okay.
Oh.
So, good, thank you. Then please, can we continue? All of you give a certain background to the choices you make. But generally, yes, you were right about Ayikwe and his vivid description of things. I mean, even to the sense that you are almost smelling the gutter that he's talking about just by reading the words. What does such description do to you as the reader? What does it do to your imagination? And how do you get the sense of the city in these choices of words he uses to describe?
Okay, the sense of the city. I think the first time I read this book, I did not quite understand what he was talking about. And then I decided to read it again. And then I took it again. So it was the third time that I read it that I understood some of the things that he was talking about. And then the sense of the description, you're asking how do I feel? Yes, how do I feel when there was this incident that he described. I can picture it in my mind when I see my grandmother at the time taking care of one of my nieces, where you see flames coming out of the nose of children, and then you see the mother using the mouth to sort of pick the phlegm because maybe she realized that the nose is irritating and there is pain, so she doesn't want to use towels or anything again, so she just go directly with the mouth to just take the phlegm. Those are some of the descriptions that you see in the book and you relate with. I remember in Fragments there was this story at a beach where not close to very close to the beach, or I think around a road that is close to a beach. I think there's that road that comes from the Labadi beach down, and across the road he was describing the killing of a dog, and then it resulted in somebody's hernia, sort of that story. So he describes things, and immediately you read it affects you, and then you ask yourself, is this what society is all about? Is this what is really happening in society? So his readings actually make you ask questions, very relevant questions, when you think about some of the things that he describes. And so that will lead me to a short part that I would read about how the life in Accra is just maybe Kumasi and the main cities probably, but life in Accra is so difficult that once you close from work, you're even thinking, your mind is, you don't even know where you are going, especially when you're looking for a trotro. The first thing you want to do is just throw your bag somewhere, run into a trotro and just get home. Sometimes you drop your bag, you get home and you realize that your bag is not with you. So those kind of the things. So I just want to read just one portion here, and then we continue with somebody else. There's this part that he was talking about, how sometimes we run into taxi drivers that they insult us. So he says, the man still on his walk. So abruptly the headlights of a fast advancing car caught him in their powerful brightness. You see, some of them, you're asking yourself why they are putting on their headlights even when there is enough light for them to see. So abruptly the headlights of a fast advancing car caught him in their powerful brightness. In that hasty second, the man was far too startled even to move. Instead, he raised his eyes in a puzzled, helpless gesture and got in them the full blinding force of the light. The scrape of the braking tires on the hard road and the stench of burning rubber hit him, bringing him out of his long half asleep. Just in front of him, the car stood with its tires sharply arched towards the safe center of the road. It was a shiny new taxi, and it was still bobbing gently up and down from the sudden halt. Bobbing gently up and down. So it's very, the descriptions are very accurate and vivid. Then the man recovered from his numbness and took the few remaining steps to the side of the road. There, away from the overpowering glare of the headlight, he saw the dim outline of the taxi driver's head as it thrust itself out through the window. For long moments of silent incredulousness, the taxi driver stared at the man, doubtless looking him up and down several times. Then in a terrible calm voice, he began, uncircumcised baboon. The taxi driver spoke as if the words he was uttering expressed only the most banal of truths. Moron of a frog. If your time has come, search for someone else to take your worthless life. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. When you are driving and people cross, you tell them, if your time has not come yet, or if you want me to kill you, not me, I'll not kill you. The man took a step forward in order to be closer to the taxi driver and said apologetically, I wasn't looking, I'm sorry. But the apologies only seemed to inflame the taxi driver's temper. Sorry, my foot, he said with a cutting softness in his voice. Next time, look where you are going. He started his engine running again as the car began to ease itself forward. He exploded in a final access of uncontrollable ear. Your mother's rotten. I don't want to mention the last word. So that's what happens when we are living in Accra and we are moving back home after work. And our mind, this is part, but I will not read that one. when our minds are we are absent-minded, we are thinking of where am I going to get a car? Maybe you live at Atomic Junction or maybe Medina, and you are looking at the traffic from 37, and then all of a sudden a taxi just brakes, screeches, and the taxi driver will insult you the hell out of you. That is what happens when you live in Accra. Back to you.
Thank you very much for that. I don't know why you censored your reading, but it's okay. We forgive you. Teresa.
Okay. What I want to say is that, in the beginning I said that setting plays a huge part in Amata Edo's works. And in this book, in Changes, she actually places each of the characters within a particular setting or identifies a character with that setting. So the reading I did about Ali, who is associated with Nima. So Ali is educated, he's part of the elite. He's rich, he's been all over the country, all over the world. But then he wants to present this facade of, I'm still a local boy, But then the interesting thing is that look at where he lives in Nima. He's not living in the middle of the city, the inner city. He lives at the outer edge. His house is not within, it's just by the edge. And from there, he can look at what is happening there. And so in the text, you notice that even though Ali claims to be a local boy, he claims to be traditional, he cannot merge that with his educated background. And so he wants to practice polygamy, but it fails because he's not doing it the right way that it is done. He cannot handle the two women. He feels guilty because of what he's doing to Fusena, and he's not able to give enough time to AC. In the end, nobody is happy. So Ali is just like that. He's not a complete hybrid. He's just, at the outer edge. And just as his house is represented in Nima, that is the way he behaves. You look at AC. AC always goes to the 20th Century Hotel, and she's associated with that place. When she goes there to meet the colleague who is coming from Kenya, the part I read, let me read this little part. So she goes there and she says, oh, yes, the receptionist cuts in, quite affably though. You were here about the same thing yesterday to ask for her. Yes, AC agreed. Just a minute, said the man. He says, your friend hasn't come yet. Okay, will you wait for her? She said, yes, I'll wait. Now let me read this part. So AC turned around. She paused for a while and moved to a step or two towards the entrance. But she changed her mind about going back out. It was clear that she was uncertain as to what to do next. She could go and sit down to have a beer, but she knew this was not really done. A woman alone in a hotel lobby drinking alcohol, it would definitely be misunderstood. Then she told herself that she was tired of all the continual misunderstandings. She was tired after a long day in the office. She was disappointed that her friend was obviously not going to show up for her workshop, and she was going to have a beer.
Recording in progress.
By this time, she was already sitting by the table. So this is AC. This place presents an avenue, an opportunity for her to be herself, to go outside the dictates of what society expects from her. And she decides, I'm tired. I want to have a beer. Let me have a beer. And then you look at what has already been going on in her life. She's not happy with her marriage. She's been trying to, accommodate the husband. It gets to a point she says, I'm done with this. And I was like, what is wrong with you? You have a nice man. He's not cheating on you. He's not beating you. What do you want? He wants to spend more time with you. It's like, no, that's not the kind of husband I want. And I was like, this woman, there's something wrong with her. But that is the kind of woman that we have here. Then Kubi, that is Opokuya's husband, is also associated with the place. He lives in, let me see if you can identify this place. Those of you who live in Accra. So I'm going to read this. It says, Opokuya and Kubi lived on Sweet Breezes Hill. It had been the most prestigious of the colonial residential areas. They occupied the same old colonial surveyor's bungalow built in the 1930s. And Opokuya was always quite aware of the different spirits who also inhabited the house. There was that of the first surveyor who had probably selected the hill as the site most suitable for occupation by them. The English civil servants who were sent to these deadly mosquito-infested regions to administer the territories on behalf of their royal majesties and generally civilize the natives. These natives, both the groups on this part of the Guinea coast and the interior of the country, were reputed to be some of the rudest and most untamable throughout the whole of the British Empire. Why this was so, no one knew, but it was definitely so. In time, quite a sizable group of Englishmen had come, bringing their women with them. They had lived close to one another so that they would be well placed to fight those natives with guns, the mosquitoes with alcohol, and general boredom with women. Of course, they always could, and they often did import both alcohol and women from home. But then, there had also been more than adequate local supplies of both. So in the end, they banned the local liquor to force the natives to buy expensive English gin and Scottish whiskey, and then proceeded to take over the local women. So this is where, do you know the place?
Well, is it Osu? Oh, okay. It's like Professor Wellington.
Yeah, it could be also.
Right.
Ridge, the ridge.
It's rich?
The ridge.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, because the ridge is on the hill.
All right. Okay.
Actually,
I'm not an Accra person, so.
With the Ridge Hospital, as it used to be the European hospital, I mean, then you come to from Ridge Hospital to Boundary Road, Barnes Road,
Okay.
where the museum is. Beyond the museum, after the archives, I mean, westwards is the African bungalows, more or less.
Yes.
But then
Okay.
as you move on the Castle Road, I mean, from the cathedral, past the asylum, the European hospital, which was the Ridge Hospital,
Right.
and now the Greater Accra Regional Hospital, to the Ridge Circle, then continuing to the, how do you call it, Osu Cemetery, the military cemetery. That was that stretch of
Is
land.
what has been described
Is
here.
what has been
Sweet
described
Breezes
now.
Hill. Right. And it's interesting that, Kubi lives there because his life exemplifies that of a colonial master.
yeah, thank you very
Live
much for
like
these readings. And it's if memories or if certain senses of nostalgia are cropping up, please share with us whilst we do another reading from Mr. Megache.
All right. Okay. Landing in Accra. A guided tour of artistic Accra. When first viewing Landing in Accra, my immediate reaction was that the project constitutes a guided tour of the city of Accra by this special group of the city's artists, mainly sign writers and painters. At the same time, I discovered in a search the work of another artist, Joseph Nash, which made me recognize that the project may be bigger than a simple tour of artistic Accra by the city signwriter artists. Although the works of Nash and Ryan are more than 100 years apart, their contents different, there is a striking similarity between the title Joseph Nash in 1891 picture and then the theme Ryan chose as her art project in 2002. 1891, then 2002. Whereas Joseph Nash's reads Landing in a Surfboat at Accra, Ryan's theme for her whole project is Landing in Accra. When I showed the picture to the artist, she was naturally as surprised as I had been. What the artwork leads me to recognize is the fact that for several decades, we Ghanaians have seen expatriate artists come and go. Some of these artists leave memorable images that could be considered treasures of art in the history of contemporary Ghana. Apart from Joseph Nash mentioned above, names like Urzeni Brezhne, Maria Kaminska, Magda French, added to these, one can include also the names of artists such as Elton Fax, John Biggess, and Leroy Kwame Mitchell. Most of these artists had what one may describe, for want of a more precise expression, a free ride in terms of criticisms from the local community. On the contrary, the same cannot be said of the latter-day artists who came in after the 1960s. Indeed, in this latter period, whenever expatriate artists were commissioned to undertake some public artworks, it raised all sorts of issues, as happened when Nicola Cataudella was commissioned to make a statue of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah for the space in front of the old Parliament House buildings in Accra. And later, when Sir Charles Wheeler was commissioned for the statue of Lieutenant General E.K. Kotoka for the Accra Kotoka International Airport. With such a history, any expatriate artist coming to Ghana knows that he or she must tread cautiously.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Can we give them a round of applause? Still waiting for contributions from the public. Okay, yes. Please, I think this mic is working. Let's see if you can ask. Yeah, or I can give you this mic. So it's not.
I'll switch it off.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I see this panel as a beautiful continuation of the first one because the first one dealt mainly with people exerting certain influence on the space. And what I've remarked here is that it is the opposite. The city shaping, whether partly or totally, the life of the people who choose to live in. And I would like to thank the panelists because they've chosen very beautiful passages to read. And these passages, tells us very clearly these experiences that I'm referring to. There are two, if you like, Togolese writers who do brilliant works, particularly describing the species and how they influence the characters. The first one is Kanya Lem. I don't know if you met him when you came. Kanya Lem does it beautifully in all of his novels, from Cola Cola Jazz to Les Enfants du Brésil. He renames the country and the capital, T. Brava, but the descriptions indicate clearly the area of the city of Lome he's talking about. Most recently, Iwanani So has taken up this job describing Togo wide and large, high and large. And I think what makes these passages or these novels powerful is the vivid description and the choice of words that the writers deal with. And it's very enjoyable to listen again to these passages after I've read them a long time ago. When you start listening, there is a spark that comes back and you see how expertly they've done this beautiful job. So thank you very much for your choices.
Yeah, thank you. Let's give a round of applause to the panelists for the job well done. Maybe another thing, language. we can talk a bit on language, and I think we said a bit about Aikwe Ama and his choice of words. Oh, there is a question. Okay, please. We'll come back to language.
Thank you very much. Bernard, I have a question that also ties in with the discussion that happened earlier with Professor Wellington. And it really has to do with what place does when migrations occur. So there have been these very beautiful descriptions of place, in the stories that have been read from. But if we begin to think about it, in a migration, people also carry stories with them and memories of place with them. So for example, this description of the hotel which we have just seen, if the people were traveling, they carried with them, they were migrating, that is, they carried with them the memory of these places. And so my question to all the panel is, how do they see these memories evolving with people who have traveled, who have migrated with them? So somebody has their whole life built around, let's say, this hotel, this 20th century hotel. Now they migrate with all this memory. How do you see these things changing as the people move out of the place that formed them in your reading of the literature? Thank you.
Anybody want to?
I think you go first.
Okay, let me try. I think I was just trying to think of a book to use as an illustration, but I think migration affects spaces in different ways. More often than not, for some characters, when they move from a place that they love to a different place, whether through forceful means, whether it's they have to move, so they're moving, not by, if sometimes even if it's by choice. This place that they are living becomes bigger in their minds than what it actually is. It becomes a symbol of something that is more than what the thing actually is. So, for example, I'm thinking of Tay Selassie's Ghana Must Go. This man leaves Ghana, he goes to the US, he works, and he's sacrificed. He's a black man, something doesn't go well, he's the one who has to take the fall for it. And then he decides to come back home. I mean, the time that he's thinking about going, it wasn't a certain decision, he thought about it. Suddenly, home, and specifically his little town back in Ghana, becomes a symbol of all that he wants to achieve. It becomes a symbol of the fulfillment that he's not getting in the US. So he decides to go back home, and he goes home and he creates his own space, a place where he thinks he'll be fulfilled there. Of course, he dies there, and his body is found right in front of his house. So I think what happens with the spaces is that what we take from those spaces become bigger than what those spaces actually are. And that was why I was, when we're talking about the first discussion, these places being turned into something else. You talked about the fact that change happens, and before they were what we know, there was something else, and things will keep changing. But I think I have a different reaction. I think certain spaces are sacred for certain people. They are places of solace, places of attachment. It's just like an umbilical cord for them. And so when these spaces are destroyed and you have people coming back home, there's a whole ball game altogether. I remember when, if you've heard of the Cape Coast London Bridge,
that's right.
It's just a little bridge, and people have heard London Bridge, they'll go there, like, oh, this is London Bridge. But of course, it's London Bridge, And something happened. They were renovating it and they pulled it down, used different stones, modern whatever, to put it up. And the Heritage Conservation was not happy with them at all, because so I find you've built it nicely, trying to keep to the original plan and everything, but it is not what it used to be. Yeah, so I think that's all I can say about these spaces.
Maybe you have something to say.
Well, I mean, can the question be, put again?
Can I try and summarize?
Go.
Try and paraphrase.
Really, that how does migration affect, or what do people take with them if
The
they would
spaces.
migrate, and how does this migration shape them? Also, I think this is basically how.
Well, rather, I have a fixation for the places and the people passing through. Speaking of the place of landing in 1891, it was the Jamestown. If you came from wherever, it was the Jamestown. And what were the, some of the signs? The warehouses, the rail lines, that connect Timber Market area through the Accra police station and old police station, the railway station, all the way through to the area between the fire service and the other warehouses, and then to the lighthouse. Then, if you turned eastwards from the lighthouse, the customs were there, the banks were there, where we have, then we have the Standard Chart. Mm-hmm. Then Shell headquarters, the Barclays Bank was there, now ABSA. The Scottish printing press was there. The Holy Spirit Cathedral was there. Holy Trinity Cathedral was there. So you could see that the place of landing attracted all the major facilities. Commercial facilities along that, that line. The lawyers were there. You see the Bible house place. And then the doctors, private practitioners, you could see them also along that line. Up to the Usher Fort. Adjacent to the Usher Fort, there was Amegache Tailoring, which operated there from 1926 till about 1984. But, what is happening today at the new landing place? You're landing in Accra, not in the surfboat. You land in Accra, overlooking the skies and all the buildings from East Legon, and then suddenly when you leave, you begin to see the airport city with the new buildings, including the Villaggio, Kente-clad Villaggio, and so on. So you can see that the center of gravity is shifting from the old place of landing to the new place of landing and beyond. And that's where you see East Legon and the rest of them. But no matter where people moved, especially the people in the old Accra, they always had to come back to their old places. You see the house of the Crabs, you see the house of the Hansons, and so on, still preserved there. So, to me, this is why I have a fixation for the places, but it is the people who move. They are, even if they change, they come they do come back. So, I mean, that's all I can say, I mean, for now.
Yeah.
No, I think it's fine.
Okay. I just also want to share something small. A colleague of mine and myself went to interview Mrs. Frances Ademola, and she, and it's good that the name is Frances Ademola, because she's married to a Nigerian, and she is the founder of the Loom Gallery, and she talks of, so this the Sweet Breezes Hill Ridge. She growing up, they were living quite like
the Kubis.
Yeah, she was living at the border of the European area and the African area, and so what she describes, even food, the eating of fufu was an issue. You could not pound fufu in the European area, so what they would do then was to boil the cassava and plantain, migrate it to the African area, to their family home, and then it's in Adabraka, and then the fufu will be pounded and then brought to them at the European area so they could eat. Because pounding fufu was a travesty in the European area. So this is a real lived experience. So she tells us of this story. So I mean, this is one of my contributions to what migration can do.
Oh well, it really created some tensions, but interesting tensions. Because speaking of this fufu, I mean, some of the people there, if they were called to, 5 o'clock tea, they would dress up and go all right, and then take the tea. But then when they wanted fufu, I mean, they came back and then got it. The story is told of how some Gold Coast officials, would drive away, their own home folks when the Europeans were, coming to visit. Then, quietly, they move the mortar and pestle away. And then the expert would come, and they would confess. Then they cross their legs and, yes, sir, they would confirm. That's right. Then the tea and the cake will be served, and then they drink and then chat. As soon as they left, they will be attentively listening to see if the mortar had ceased. As soon as it was quiet, and then the mekwang and the mre and things were wafting in the air, you hear the coffee. Mommy, they'll be calling.
I think Kwanzaa also characterizes this in Heritage Africa, where Quincy Arthur Bosomfield drives away his mother, asks his mother to sit outside or something because he had important guests. These are some of the tensions that Accra put us through.
And I think you are still dealing with it. We still see manifestations of this.
Even more.
Even now, people are still grappling with
tensions,
integrating their two sides. And I think it's fine, I'm not one to say, reject one and take it. Whatever we say or whether we like it or not, we are the product of these two identities. So we have to find a way of getting these two identities integrated in us. Yeah, we are the same people who take the tea, and then afterwards we go and eat our fufu and our benkwai. So it's a matter of accepting that this is who we are. There's no need to pretend that I don't like this. Oh, I'm not like that. You are like that. That is who you are. The more you try to reject one, the more fragmented you become. You become like Onipa Bako, and then eventually you go crazy. Yes. That's why people have a lot of neurosis,
Be taken to asylum.
Yeah, this is it. For so many years, we had this contact. It's whether we like it, I think it's even stamped into our DNA somehow.
Yes.
So let's move with it. Accept that we are products of these two cultures and take the best from both and blend the two.
I think even Kwame Nkrumah advises more than even the two. So he suggests, because I mean, it's also a fact of our making. And I think what our attention must be drawn to the fact that we have to do it deliberately.
Right.
I think it is when we don't do it deliberately and critically, then it becomes a problem. So what of these aspects are we selecting and taking and choosing? Because it is true that the Arabic intrusion into Africa was great, and it left a mark. The Western intrusion came, it left a mark. But even before all this, we were also interacting amongst ourselves. And all these have left marks. And so that's why I go back to. So the fact that we called, so now I'm going back to respond to Professor Wellington in absentia. The real nuance, and my colleague drew my attention, Anayo Sapong. The nuance of Peja really, when we started and we were thinking about the name, was to have the first part of the whole setup, Peja, as something that transformed with time, and then a literary festival in Accra remained. And so maybe Peja, a literary festival in Accra for the first one, then maybe the next one will be Sunla, a literary festival in Accra, or Midojo, a literary festival in Accra, or Tingangme or something, which is Basari, or Let Us Make Fire. Actually, Basari people are the people who dance in fire. So the nuance of Peja itself is actually complex. Yeah. And I think maybe it was serendipity or laziness that made us keep Peja, but it was actually meant to transform over the years. So maybe this is in response to Prof. in abstention. Yeah. Actually, we have been enjoying this conversation, and we are happy that we have interacted so much with the audience. I don't want to burden my panelists anymore. I think we've had quite an interesting discussion. And so we'd like to thank all of you for sitting in with us and having this discussion. Peja itself promises more of such sessions. Yeah, thank you for the clapping. So see you tomorrow. And would somebody want to just, Martin, maybe a little summary or a foretaste of what tomorrow brings for us? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bernard, and thank you all the panelists for this amazing panel. I learned so many things I didn't even know exist. I mean, I didn't know there was such friction about fufu. But I guess that's why it tastes so nice. Peja, I have come to feel, brings a lot of people together to share experiences. I'm really glad that we've started this way. I believe that tomorrow we will even enjoy it more. I will hasten to say that it's not possible to run through all the programs that we have tomorrow, on account of the fact that we are doing almost about 40 different programs over the 9 hours. But I would encourage everyone to join us by any of the means that are provided. I would always go for physical participation. But anyway, do join us. I will commend also a movie. I shouldn't do this because unfortunately it means that I'm saying do this one instead of that one. And we have parallel sessions all the time. But we do have a movie. It's called An African Apocalypse. And it's being made available by the filmmakers. I think it's a really important movie because it tells the story of colonization and the things that happened to Africans from a uniquely African perspective, but wearing Western lens. So it's like looking at Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness from the Heart of Darkness itself. So, so there is that. I would also commend the many readings that are going to be happening. There is a book it's titled The Riddle of the Oil Thief. And when I saw this book, I immediately recognized that it was an extremely important book. It's coming from our brothers in Nigeria. And I think that a book like this is a clear light for us in Ghana. I mean, they've been drilling oil for so many years. So they have something to tell us. And we are fortunate that we have with us in our midst and who came by himself to present this work to us. He is with us this evening, actually. So I would like to present His Royal Majesty, King Buba Lai. I hope I got it right. But he is here with us this evening, yes. And he is going to be having a discussion about his book, The Riddle of the Oil Thief. It's actually an extremely important book, as I have already said. We also have with us colleagues from Togo. Patron Hendeku, he is no stranger at all to Twitter. He has also come with his friend who is, I'm going to get the name, it's Jifa, right? Yes. Jifa. And they are going to be participating in readings. There is also another program. It's going to examine an important aspect of African literature from the perspective of writing in the Ewe language. So there's a group of scholars who believe that they have discovered the Ewe book of the century. And they are going to be discussing that book. And we will have our colleagues from Lume also joining. So there's actually a lot to take home from tomorrow and Sunday. I would encourage you to be with us from 9 a.m. tomorrow to 9 p.m. tomorrow. And then on Sunday we have a KK party. So it's sponsored. You can come and eat free KK in the morning, and then we end at 9 p.m. tomorrow. Thank you very much, Bernard.
Thank you, Martin, for that update, and thank you all. Thank you once again to the panelists for doing such a wonderful job. You were great, and thank you, audience, and thank you, those viewers at home. Yeah, keep coming back because there's more for you. Thank you. Bye.
Madam, do you mind?
It's in your pocket.
Can you put it off for me?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.